G'day everyone. Just saw Snap Clicks here early. I've actually posting online now, just waiting to see it actually pop up. It should be popping up any second. There we go. Just checking. So good evening from down under on this beautiful sunny day. I'm just going to put the air conditioner on actually. Bear with me. Always forget to do that. I wanted to really pop on and chat with you guys today. I'm going to give it a few minutes for everyone to log on, just to make sure everyone's here before I start going through all the specs and everything of each of these cameras. But so we'll just have a quick chat. Just going to bring up the live chat so we can see who's here. So we've got SnapClick here. Is here early? Casper's also here. Hi, Casper. CW Daily's here. CRM Media, hi. How are you, mate? Alfred Kitchens is here. Love your work. Thank you so much, Alfred. Mike's here. How's it going? Going great, Mike. Really good. I've been really busy, actually, and wedding season's really kicking up over the next month. Going to be really busy over the next month. I've got weddings every single weekend now for the next 4 or 5 weeks. What else? Mike said, answer a7III pre-ordered. Woohoo! Rebecca's here. Hi, Rebecca. How are you? Good to see you on board. Photo Adventures here as well. Mike's just saying hi to everyone. Rob M saying, g'day, David. Hello from California. G'day, Rob. How are you? CW Daily is saying good evening from Florida. David Johnson's here as well. Altrix here as well. And Sam is also here. Falani is here as well. How are you, mate? So the stacks, we've got stacks on board. I'm really interested to see what you guys think about the discussion we have today too, because I'm going to try and break down these cameras for usage, and I'll talk about too eventually where I'll probably use them, and I'll also talk to you about how I think these specs fit in each area. But I just want to talk to you about a couple of things beforehand, which is really interesting what's going on in the YouTube universe with a couple of reviewers and stuff that I thought I might talk about, and the hate that's out there. Again, it just never surprises me the amount of hate that Sony shooters tend to get from the opposition, which just cracks me up. And usually they're sponsored people. Now, all of these sponsored people can't argue in that respect because I'm not sponsored by anyone. So I just talk from my heart and from what I use personally and what I've paid for. If ever I'm going to review something that I haven't paid for, I'm going to tell you guys. And even then, I would still be honest in how I reviewed it. So I just wanted to talk to you about that. G'day, Tony's here as well. Rebecca said, doing well. Great job on the videos. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Thanks so much for supporting us. It's always terrific too to have females in these chats because we often don't get enough of them, so I'm really happy that you're on board, Rebecca. Snack Click, I have a lot to say. That's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when we get the chat going, guys. Who have we got? Alfred is saying, how does it match up with any strobes and does it have problems firing? You're talking about the a7III. It probably won't, but there may have to be updates. I'm sure there'll be updates to the Pro Photo unit that I've got. Will be updated in firmware. Sometimes you just have to wait for the strobe manufacturers to update their latest firmware for each camera, but that happens like anything. It's like waiting for Adobe RAW support and things like that to come out. If you fire manually, usually though, there's never any issues. It's usually if you're using TTL and things like that, Alfred, that you end up having issues with the strobes. Apart from that, it should work pretty well. SRM Media says, he's saying hi to Tony. David said, how you doing, Tony? CW Daily said, yeah, the sponsor folks are already getting out of hand. Even the Sony sponsored shooters are a bit obnoxious. And that's what, I suppose that's what you've got to think about. I mean, I sort of I'm going to talk to this from my perspective about how the whole thing goes. And like I said, I'm not sponsored by Sony, so there's no way known I'm getting money off anyone for these, apart from probably what I'll end up making on YouTube or affiliate links, but that's about all for me. So I'm certainly not sponsored by Sony to say anything at all. So I'm just going to talk about the specs and where I think that they'll be used. But all right, so let's get started anyway. So I'm just going to bring up the logo just for a second, just because that's where we'll start the show, because we've got plenty now watching. G'day everyone. Not having a beer today because this is just an impromptu live show. Obviously I'll be having a beer o'clock with you guys on Friday, my time, which is Thursday US time. Got an incredibly busy month coming up, or 6 weeks actually, of weddings. I'm shooting every single weekend. doing weddings, so I'm looking forward to that over the coming weeks. And obviously I'll be sharing some images of that and stuff like that, and other shoots that I do along the way. I have just recently posted a couple of videos with using the A9, if you want to go back and check those out. I've been really enjoying using the A9, incredibly so, for portraits and things like that. I used to more use my a7R II nearly all the time, but once I've moved over to using the A9, it's very hard to go back to using the a7R II, and I probably will only use that now for special occasions and where I nearly need the resolution and stuff like that, which is what I'll talk to you about the specs that I'm going to go through with you as well. A little bit later on. I'm just going to bring up the chat just so you can see everyone that's here. So, you know, I basically wanted to talk to you about how these three cameras stack up, but also about the negativity that's sort of out there on the internet, which is really interesting how people are sort of trying to immediately start to slam the camera without using it. I can probably talk in fairly good confidence of how the a7III is going to be, because it's going to be very similar to how they released the a7RIII and the A9, and they are amazing cameras, and I'm almost sure that the a7III is going to be a similar camera that's released out there. But it's more about the negativity that's sort of out there at the moment with people like, g'day Gilbert, I just noticed you're here too. Nice to see you here. Gilbert's from the UK. Now before that, I just wanted to plug our website, because I do want you guys joining in with me, guys, on the photography and videography school. So if you are joining, if you do follow me on Facebook, it's a great idea to join this group, which is the Photography and Videography School. The link's down below. That's Gilbert's image. We have competitions now each week where the winner gets selected and their picture is put up onto the group page, and Gilbert won that. But if you follow us, basically it'll automatically say I'm going to go live. It'll talk things like that. But all through it, we have people where I'm giving critiques. I was giving Flav some comments about the image that he posted here and critiquing him, giving him some advice about how he could improve pictures. We've got videos where people are putting up videos, feeds of their work. People are sharing Instagram feeds. Again, that's another image that Issa put in, and I gave some critique about that image. You can see here that I'm actually talking about the critiques down here. So this site is basically for you guys. So it's an extension of my YouTube channel, but it's more where you guys can also promote your work. The only thing I say on this is you can only post 3 images per day. That's the only limit. You can't go live on it, but you can share videos, you can share your Instagram feeds, any business pages that you're looking for, models that you're looking for, anything. I really want you guys to get something out of this page. So please join us in there, because it's growing really well, and I'd love to get you on board, and also you can join the weekly competitions and things like that we have going. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that. The link is down below on this YouTube feed, so please put a link there and ask to join, and I'd love to have you on board. But having said that, let me just move this out of the way for a minute. Where's this other window? There. All right, so having said that, at the moment, I just want to basically go through with you about some of the negativity that's around with the new release. And it's a little bit silly. Like, what I'm seeing is negativity, particularly from a couple of people out there. I noticed I watched one from Amar, I think his name is, this morning, where he was talking about, bagging people like Jason Lanier, people like that. And I'm thinking, how on earth can you bag anyone? Seriously, if you're going to bag another photographer, you have to have the work to back it up. If you haven't got the work or the portfolio to back it up, you should not be bagging another photographer. And when I see people like him that's bagging Jason Lanier and the a7III and stuff, I'm thinking, oh boy. And then the funny part about it is at the bottom, he's actually recommending where they can buy the camera from the link. And I'm just thinking, oh, that's the biggest joke. But the other one, which I knew was going to come about, was the Angry Photographer started his rant the other day on the a7III, and I knew it was going to come. I'm not sure whether he's sponsored by Fuji, I just don't know. I mean, he's never said he is, but he's for someone that is always whinging about never having money, he's getting an incredible amount of cameras and things like that that he has, and lenses and things like that he has. And he really used to be the Nikon guy, and now he's pushed over completely to Fuji. So I'm a little bit skeptical about where these are all coming from and his bias against particularly Sony, which I think is completely unfounded. I mean, all he talks about, and guys, this is the thing that is the most ridiculous thing that I keep hearing, is people whinging about menus. You know what? Not long ago, it used to be that they would whinge about the battery of the Sony. They would whinge about the focus of the Sony. Oh, by the way, in the questions, please start... I'm just laughing at Tony's comment. Please put at David Oster in the comments in the live chat, because I'll come back to this later on. I will scroll back to this later on, and I can have a look at any questions you have. But like the Angry Photographer, they used to always talk about Sony's lack of lenses. They used to talk about Sony's autofocus. They used to talk about Sony's body size. They used to talk about Sony's menu. All these things they used to start talking about. And the second that Sony fixes one, like the massive one used to be the AF, overheating used to be the main thing that people used to whinge about. And then naturally, now that they're all fixed, they have to go on to something else. Now, notice one of the things that the Angry Photographer talked about the other day was the banding. And if you look at that thing, you can cause any camera to do anything in a test situation. I can almost guarantee to you that it's not going to be an issue once you get this camera, because, I mean, I will be getting this camera, the a7III. Everyone was going on about the banding of the A9 because of the initial tests at the beginning that were done, and I've never seen banding in it. Now, I know Michael, who often joins us, and he may later today, had one issue with one file, he said, using the A9 in some weird lighting where it was showing banding. Apart from that, he hasn't seen it again. I've never seen banding in any of my shots with the A9. The a7III is like anything. It's because of the sensor, that PADAF sensor, that under certain conditions you can get banding that will show up. And that banding will show up in any system if you look for it. And this is the way that these companies actually look for these things. So when you're looking at people like that are not inside that system, and they start bagging the camera without having it, without really knowing what that camera has, you really have to take it with a grain of salt. And someone like the Angry Photographer, for instance, used to bag Sony all the time really, really badly. He used to bag Jason Lanier until he did the shoot, and then he shut up because he got his ass kicked basically in that shoot. There's something that's going on in this industry that these people are terrified about moving on. I wasn't terrified about moving on. I moved from Nikon to Sony. Was Nikon bad? No, it wasn't. The Nikon system was amazing, but it just didn't have what I needed at that time. And this is the thing that I'm trying to say to you guys, and this is why I might be a little bit different than also a lot of other people out there that are being sponsored or whatever that are promoting these cameras. I'm not being sponsored. I'm talking about it from a professional who has a full-time business using this gear. And when you start hearing reviewers like Amar and the Angry Photographer bagging Sony the way they do, there's always hidden agendas there, and you know, it's either to cause shock value and get more subscribers over to their channel, or they really are just have blinkers on and they're completely blind. But automatically trying to say things like the a7R III has massive banding is the biggest load of crap that you could ever say. If you look for it, yes, you can force any camera to do anything if you want to force it to do it. 99% of the occasions you probably won't find banding in that camera at all. Now, I haven't got it yet, but I am saying from previous examples, Sony aren't stupid. They're not going to release a camera that is going to be disastrous in that area. I think this camera has probably been around for a while. It probably was around late last year, but because of the D850, the Nikon version, Sony had to answer that, and they rushed the A7R out. And that's what I think actually happened, and that's why I think the a7III has come out quickly, and that's why I think there'll be more numbers of the a7III than what you believe for releasing, because I think that's been sitting there for a while. But anyway, that's another thing. But be very careful about what you take from a grain of salt from these reviewers that are completely from other systems that start bagging another system. You've got to be very careful with that. But we will come back to this as well. I think, looking at it, I think the a7III has scared the living daylight out of most of these other reviewers who are so into one camera system, and basically their whole livelihood revolves around being sponsored by Fuji or whatever. And and been sponsored by Canon, and they're basically crapping themselves. You know, and I just think, get over it, guys. Show us your work, show us your quality of your work, and you'll notice 90% of these reviewers that do this sort of stuff never show you their work. I've just put up 2 videos over the last 2 days showing my work. Now, whether you like that or not, that's up to you, but my clients certainly like it, and I'll stand by my work that I'm producing with Sony, just as I would stand by it with what I was producing with Nikon. Therefore, you know, these people have to put up or shut up. The angry photographer did it against Jason, and he got his ass kicked, and then he went dead quiet for a while, and I think he only brought the a7III out of desperation at the end, just talking about the banding with the a7III. The other thing that they keep talking about is the menu system. I mean, honestly, guys, I touch the menu system once in a while. I am not going through the menu system every time I get out the camera. Is the menu system a problem for me? No, it's not, because now I know it. It may be a problem for the angry photographer because he knows Fuji. He knows that Fuji system. Once you're used to using the Sony system, it's just as easy as using everything else. And it does my head in that people keep talking about the Sony menu system is so bad. It's not that bad once you get to know it. It's actually quite easy. I can get around that menu system really easily now. And the beauty is, once you put everything up to your custom buttons, once you have all this set up in here to your custom buttons everywhere, I very rarely ever need to go to the menu system. The only menu system I use basically is the FN menu, which I'll show you if I can get a focusing point on this. I haven't got a memory card in there. Let me just cancel. Yeah, it's not going to let me do it because I haven't got my memory cards in the camera. The only menu that I use is the FN menu, which has the icons that come up on here. I will use those for all of the shoots. So they're the only ones that I actually use for my camera. And you know, I just wish I put a card in there so I could have showed you that. That's the only time really that I go into menu. The only other time apart from that I go into those menus is if I want to change the resolution for video and things like that. But now you have favorite menus on these that you can just immediately go into there and change the menus. The menu system is not a problem, guys, in these cameras. Don't let people fool you into saying the menu system is crap in these cameras. It's not. I only wish you could use touchscreen to change it. That's about all. So I'm being honest with you in that scenario. Is it as good as it could be? No, it's not. But it certainly is not hard to use once you get used to the Sony system. So having people like the angry photographer blasting Sony on the menu system, is that all you've got? Honestly, I mean, seriously, just get out there and shoot, mate. It's ridiculous. And it is total nonsense. It's complete, utter nonsense that the menu system is that bad, especially in the newer ones. It's actually really quite easy to use once you're used to it. It's like anything. If I went to a Canon, and recently I did use the Canon 5D Mark IV, I didn't know how to use the menus because I hadn't used that camera before. So I could have said the same thing, that the menu system was crap. I didn't understand it. Did I say that? No, I didn't. Did I like that camera? No, I didn't. But I certainly didn't go online saying I hated the menu system because I didn't know it. Once you get to know it, and you guys that are shooting Sony understand that with me too, the menu system is not hard once you get used to it. Anyway, let's get off the rant because I'm going to start going through these bits and pieces about these 3 cameras. So what I wanted to talk to you about today particularly is which camera you should buy, because I've had a lot of people asking me, should I get the a7III, should I get the a7R III and the A9? I'd like to start though, before I even go over to the specs on these cameras, about what I think about the a6500 now at the present stage. And whether we should put that into the equation. And I haven't got it. I'm using Max Yurov's quick diagram that he pointed up, so I'll show you that when we go through some of the features, and I'm going to add a couple of things that I think are important for me and maybe important for you as well. And guys, I'm just watching the chat go nuts. I am going to come back to the chat too with you all. But the a6500 at the moment, I don't personally think I would buy it at this stage until Sony release, say, an a6700, if they do. I'm not 100% certain they will, but I'm hoping they do, with something like a fold-out screen, something like that. But to be honest, at the moment, if I was dealing with having the money for an a6500, I would try and save the extra and get the a7III at the moment, because that is so much of a better camera than what the a6500 is. So if I was in that marketplace, I would be getting the a7III rather than the a6500 at this stage. And even to be honest now, I often use full frame glass. At the moment, I'm using the a6500 here to record me with the 24 1.8 on there, and it still is a fantastic gimbal camera. Would I buy it again at the moment? No, I wouldn't. I'd probably get the a7III and with full frame glass. And to be honest, even if I was thinking about getting the a6500 at the moment, I would put full frame glass on that and use it as it is. So that I could move up to full frame when I needed to, and that's what often I do. I use my full frame glass on the a6500, but so I'm not going to talk about that in this discussion, the a6500 at this stage. And like I said, if you want my attention in this, just make sure you put @DavidOsler for when I come back for the chat a little bit later on. So let's just, for starters, go over to this web page because I want to show you obviously the three different cameras that we're talking about. Let me just move this over. Actually, I'll just reduce this down a little bit. It'll make it easier. So what we're looking at here, obviously, is the a7III, and I'm going to go through the specs with you in a minute about each camera and what each camera will give. If you're looking at body-wise, the a7III and the a7R basically look exactly the same, so I'm not certain there's any differences in body at all. They both have now the joystick at the back. They're both touch screen. I think they have the same menu functions on the top, things like that, so they're basically the same if you're talking about body, therefore they should both use the same grip. It's only the A9 that is different in body in the fact that it has the extra dial up here, which if we look here, so this is really the only difference that you're talking about is this extra dial. Let me turn it around. Right here. Now on that dial you've got your obviously your focusing mode, which is your manual, AFC and AFS, and on the top there you've got your whether you want to have it on high speed, single shot, your low speed, medium, and obviously bracketing, and also time exposure is on here. And to be honest, I really love this, and I hate going back to my other cameras because I'm always going to look for this dial instead of going through the menus like the FN button and changing it through there, which is where I have it set up on my other cameras. Apart from that though, the bodies basically are the same. But that dial alone, I love that, and I wish they'd incorporate that in all of their bodies now, but I suppose they have to make a difference between, you know, their highest end model and their base models. But that really seems to be the only difference in the camera bodies themselves. I think the weather sealing is probably similar in all of them, but that will remain to be seen once the a7III is broken down. I think the A9 and the a7RIII is very similar, so I'll be pretty sure the a7III is probably got a similar amount of weather sealing, but we'll have to wait for the full breakdown to sort of see it. You know, so basically all the models are the same. If you look at them, if we just look at the a7III, for instance, they'll have some pics here, I hope. Yeah, they have. They've just got the same thing, which is your joystick. Oh, I've got to come back. If you look at the joystick on the back, you can see that each one now has that. You've got the C3 button the same. The menu is in the same place. AEL, AF on is there, which I use as back button focus. Yeah, they're the same as what's on the A9. Your FM button's the same. So basically, they're all the same in the way that they work. If you look down the top menu, you can see here that this probably will be the same as what the a7RIII is. And we'll have a look at the a7RIII actually, just to go through some images to have a look at them. Yeah, so it looks like it's exactly the same. So there's no difference. The only one that's different, like I said, is the A9, which if we go, well, I have a top-down button. It's just this is the difference in the camera. That's really the only difference, really. The rest of it's the same, so there's no reason to look at any more of that. But what I want to bring up is the specifications, because this is what I wanted to talk to you about, are these specs that are here. So this is from Max Urev's, I'll just make this a bit bigger so we can see it without the other stuff around. So this is Max Urav's diagram that he did from a great review that he recently just did. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things from this, because if you're thinking about going between the three cameras, I'm just going to have a drink. These are the main specs, and please, if you can think of anything else, put them in the comments, because I will come over and talk to you about this in the comments down below. But let's look at the main specs between the three cameras. So the a7R III is a 42 megapixel camera, and I'm just going to bring up something so I can just draw as well. So both of these cameras, the a7R III has 42 megapixels, the a7 III has 24, and the a9 has 24. So in that case, each one of these, the a7 III and the a9 has the same amount of megapixels. So the big difference here is the 42 megapixels of the a7R II. And this is where this comes into play if you're dealing with shooting landscape, or you're shooting high-end studio shoots for retouching, or you're just going to get something that will be enlarged an awful lot later on. And I'm talking about really big, because you would want to have to go really big to justify that resolution, or if you want to crop into an image. So these are areas where the 42 megapixels can be an advantage. If you want to do landscape, definitely, because you need detail. If you want to crop in on an image instead of moving your feet, or you haven't got enough reach on your lens, you can then use the 42 megapixels to crop in. And also if you're doing high-end retouching, because you need the detail on the skin and things like that, or fabric, you need the detail in that fabric. Or if you're blowing something up to a really large size. Now that is more of a niche market than what you will be shooting for an everyday photographer, and that's why I'll be talking about the a7 III is probably the best all-round camera in this class for that type of thing. But anyway, let's go back to these specifications. Now the next thing that we'll look at is the frames per second. So the a7R III has 10 frames per second on mechanical shutter, and it also has 10 frames per second with electronic shutter. The a7 III has 10 frames electronic and 10 frames mechanical. So therefore, that's basically the same. So these two are on parity if you're dealing with using the frames per second. Whereas the a9, this is where this streaks ahead. So the a9 is 20 frames per second, but it's only 5 frames per second mechanical. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you're talking about these three cameras, I very rarely have to use flash over 5 frames per second. I have to be honest there. I very rarely ever use it where I'm blasting 10 frames per second, because to be honest, it almost gets to be like a strobe. People hate that flashing that goes off like that constantly. And it's just not a nice thing to do unless you have a real reason to do it, like you wanted to freeze a dancer coming across a dance floor or something like that. So in specialized scenarios, 10 frames per second with flash is a useful it's a useful thing. But I very rarely ever use high frame rates for flash work. It's mostly, if I'm doing high frame rates, it's usually using continuous light. Does that mean I would never use it? No, it doesn't. But I've found, to be honest, that 5 frames per second is ample enough for me for what I'm doing for flash work. If I'm going to be using anything that's faster than that, I'm going to try and light it, and I will try and light it with continuous lights. And this is where the a9 will come into play. Because if you're dealing with trying to shoot action, for instance, if you're trying to shoot a dancer that's jumping across the screen, if you're trying to have a golf swinger or a footballer running to take a mark of the ball or catch the ball or whatever they're going to do, that 10 frames can make a major difference in you getting your shot or not getting your shot. So having that extra frames is worth it if you are in that type of an area where you need those high frame rates. Because the difference between getting a perfect shot is, you may have a perfect shot where the eyes of a dancer are open or closed. You might get the perfect pose that you can only get if you have that amount of frames. So having 20 frames per second for me particularly has been amazing in certain scenarios, because I do a lot of dance work, and that really has been fantastic. Do I do it with mechanical shutter? No, because I don't use flash when I'm usually doing that. I'm usually cranking up the ISO and using natural light or continuous light. Therefore, I can shoot off the 20 frames per second. And I really do use that, and I've been able to pick the perfect image. And I've shown that before where that's been used with some of the dance shots that I've got. So in that scenario, the A9 wins if you're dealing with wanting continuous sort of 20 frames per second. Otherwise, again, both of the a7R III and the a7III are basically neck and neck if you're dealing with your frames per second. So again, it only then comes down to whether you want the resolution of the 42 megapixels or the 24. So I hope that answers that part of it. Let's come down to the buffer. The buffer in this camera in the a7R III is 76 RAWs, which is incredible when you think about it. Let me just delete that. I'll do the whole thing. The buffer is 76 RAWs. You've got 81 RAW buffer in the a7III, and the A9 has 241, which is insane. And I've never ever run out of the buffer in the A9, and I've played around with it and never ever done it. You'd have to be doing some serious shooter to run out of the buffer, particularly if you use a fast card. Although if you're shooting JPEG, all of these cameras probably never will run out. So that's an interesting thing. If you did want to make sure you're not going to run out of the buffer, you could probably shoot JPEG and you would never run out of the buffer. But 76 RAW in the a7R III is incredible for the file size that you're dealing with there. And you have 81 on the a7 III. So again, the real difference here is the A9. And that's why they're marketing the A9 as a sports photographer, or something like I was saying for things like dance and things like that, where you need that shot to get that perfect moment. If you're dealing with getting that perfect moment and that perfect look, having it potentially missed can be an issue, whereas you're never going to miss it with the A9. So that's what basically will distinguish the A9 as against the a7 II and the a7R III. So again, if you're looking at the a7R III against the a7 III here, the difference is the megapixels again. The only difference there is megapixels. And this is why I say to people when they say, why would you buy an A9? There is a big difference between the A9 and the other cameras, guys. If you're talking about what I've just discussed with you, there is still a major difference. 241 against 81. 20 frames per second against 10. So there is still a huge difference in what you'd need that camera for. Now let's go down to the next one, which is AF. So if you're looking at the AF, the a7R III has 399. The a7 II has 693 phase, and it has 400 contrast detection points, which probably will help that focus in low light. So that may be the best low light focusing camera that Sony have. It remains to be seen. I haven't used it, so I'm just guessing. Contrast is usually used for that, and I think it's also used in IAF as well. So that could be a real big advantage for that camera if you're dealing with low light and IAF. And I know Jason showed some really interesting videos recently of the IAF with Canon lenses, and that's particularly probably where that contrast focus is coming into play. So if you're dealing with these cameras, for instance, the A9 particularly, and like I said, I haven't used the a7 III yet until I get one. The A9 particularly is the best focusing camera I have ever used, and I used to have the D4S, and I honestly think this is so much better than what I had with the D4S. It's easily as good in low light. The difference between the two is the IAF. It's just incredible when you're doing weddings and things like that. To be able to have the tracking of the eye and the face like it does is a totally different ball game than what I was using in the D4S. So once again, I can talk from experience. Have I used the D5? No, but I can talk to you from about when I had the D4S. And I could definitely say that the A9 is the best focusing camera that I've ever had. Having those range of focus points across the whole screen is unbelievable. When you have a dancer that comes in off the edge and you haven't even got her on the screen and it focuses the second she comes in, I'm using wide area and on continuous focus, and it will track her coming right across the screen. All I have to do is keep the back button focus pressed down and it follows her right the way through. So the A9 is by far the best focusing camera I have ever had. Now, from the reviews out there that I've been watching, people are saying that the A9 still has a bit of an advantage over the a7 III. But what you're getting for that camera, for that price, is incredible when you think you're basically getting the A9 focusing system on the a7 III. So in effect, the a7III is going to give you much better focusing. Well, I shouldn't say much, but it is going to give you better focusing than what the a7R III has. It will have to. There's more coverage there. You've got 693 as against 399. And you've definitely got more contrast detection focus points as well. So it is definitely going to give you better focusing than what the a7R III has. It's not probably going to give you as good as what the A9 has, and I believe in video tracking and things like that, the A9 is still better. So if you are doing your tracking in those cameras, the A9 is still better, and I suppose they may have done that deliberately to keep a differential between the cameras, I'm not sure, but the A9 is still going to be clearer in that regard over the two of them. Probably not much better, but it will be better. So if you're talking about overall here, out of this, you'd probably say, well, the a7III and the A9 are also neck and neck. They both beat the a7R III. Again, the main difference is megapixels. If you want the 42 megapixels, then you have to go for the a7R III. Let's keep going down because this next one is interesting. So you've got 15 stops of dynamic range. Now I'm going to open something up because I do want to show you what you can do with the A9 because it's amazing how much you can pull up the. I'll bring that up later on. Just remind me because I don't want to change things. Just remind me later on. A9. DR. I hope I don't forget because I want to show you how much you can pull that up. So there's 15 stops dynamic range in the a7R III, 15 stops dynamic range in the a7III, and I believe the a7III is, according to the bottom down here, it said Rishi from DP Review tested it to be a third better than the a7R III, and so therefore again it's going to be better than the A9, which gives you 14 stops of dynamic range. To be honest, I find 14 stops to be more than ample, but please give me more because I do always underexpose. So having this dynamic range is the difference, say, between Canon and what Sony have. Canon have amazing autofocus. Now, see, I'm saying that. I'm giving Canon a plug here. Again, I'm just not like the angry photographer that's going to bag everything out of there because I think there's hidden agendas. I'm not going to be like Amar. The Canon has amazing autofocus and it probably does have the best focusing system on any camera. There is it clear? I can't remember what they call it, but it's incredibly good. And when I used the 5D Mark IV, I used it and it is amazingly good. Is it much better than the A9? No, it's not. It certainly wasn't any better when I was doing photos, but it was definitely better when I was doing video. So they've all got 14 stops of dynamic range. So the a7R III and the a7III are neck and neck. The A9 is a little bit behind because they've concentrated more on the frames per second here, etc. So that they're probably not as fussed in what that will give you. But 14 stops of dynamic range is still amazing, and I'll show you that before I finish because I'd like to bring that up. 15 stops is amazing now. Now, why is that important? Because if you're like me and I always underexpose something, being able to bring that back later on is unbelievable, and I always use that. That's the reason why I chose Sony when I came from Nikon, because Sony basically had Nikon had Sony sensors, and the dynamic range was always been the same basically in the Nikon cameras as it was in the Sony cameras. That's where Canon have always fallen behind. Their dynamic range has never been as good as what Sony have. So if you're trying to underexpose and then pull those shadows back later on, or have that full dynamic range in video, the Sony is going to be way better. So having 15 stops dynamic range on the a7R III and the a7III, they're basically neck and neck, but they're saying the a7III is a fraction better, a third of a stop, which really is nothing, but at least you're not losing there. You will lose a little bit if you've got the A9. So again, if you're looking here, the a7R III and the a7III are the winners. The a7III, again, has probably taken that mantle. Now, if you go down to the next one, which is price, you've got $3,200 for the a7R III, $1,999 US for the a7III, and you've got the A9, which is $4,500. So here, the clear winner is the a7III. And this is why I'm saying too that for probably 80% of photographers out there that are just doing your normal type studio work, doing portraits outside, doing weddings and events, those type of part of the industry, the a7 III is going to be more than enough for what you will ever have to do. I shoot most of my weddings and portraits and things like that with my A9, which is the same megapixels as the a7 III. I won't be getting rid of my a7 II, and eventually I may get the a7R, or I might get an a9R, whatever they come out there. I do like the megapixels sometimes if I'm doing, I can see that and remember, I always envisage what I'm going to do with the image. So there are occasions where I will grab my a7R II to do some amazing shot that I'm going to do with a bride that I know I may eventually go to a massive size, poster size, or if I definitely want that ultimate in resolution. So I will occasionally go back over. But for 80 to 90% of my work, the A9 is ample. There's no way I'm going to be shooting a wedding with the a7R III. I don't need that file size. I don't need to have to store that amount of data. The 24 megapixels for me is the sweet spot. Now remember, this is my opinion from where I'm coming on. People are going to say, no, you've got to have the a7R III. Well, that may be for you. If you're a landscape photographer, yes. If you're just doing high-end studio portraits, yes. Everyone else, almost everyone else, should be shooting the a7 III. The A9 has a more niche market in the fact that it will be if you need that frames per second, and you need the ultimate fast focusing. Now, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to add to this, though, that for me is very important. So the A9 particularly is that I can do this, which is 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed. And that to me has changed my whole way of shooting. And I love to be able to do that. And the other thing too, which is a real difference with this, is no blackout. So there's no blackout at all on the A9 viewfinder. Now remember, the viewfinder on this camera here is not as good. So I shouldn't say bad viewfinder, but the viewfinder is not as good. I should have made this smaller. So the viewfinder on this camera is not as good. The a7R III and the A9 basically have the same EVFs and the screen at the back. I believe that the a7 III has a lower resolution viewfinder. So if that is a critical thing for you, it could be an issue. And I did see a review the other day talking about, oh yeah, it was the Camera Store TV. Jordan was talking about the fact that he had to manually punch in when he was doing video to focus on the a7 III, whereas he didn't have to do that with the a7R III or the A9 because that viewfinder was so sharp. So that could be an issue if you're shooting video using the a7 III, but most of the time it's not going to be an issue, and I still think it will be good enough. Now I've got the a7R II, and I believe the a7 III is as good as that with the screen and the electronic viewfinder, and I'm quite comfortable with that viewfinder, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. But the 1/32,000th of a shutter speed is a big difference for me with this, and I'm just going to show you an image why I find that important. Because if we look here, these were shot. Now, I deliberately shot this. These weren't done at 1/32. That was actually at 1/4000th. Now, I wanted to make all these images look very similar. But later on down the track, where were we? It was down here somewhere. Where are we? I need to make these bigger. Oh, here we go. Yeah, the light actually changed a lot later on down here. The light actually changed down in this area. The sun came out. So basically what happened was I had to up the ISO. So having the ability to push the ISO way up when you're doing 1.8 to blur out the background makes a difference when you're shooting these type of images. So it can make a real difference in your shooting. Now, I deliberately wanted to make these look like they were all low, sort of moody and stuff like that. So I was shooting natural light. I wanted to have a vintagey look on this, and I wanted to blow out that background that you see sort of through here. I started out shooting I think it was 1/3200th of a second. It went to 1/4000th, and then I ended up going up to 1/32,000th because the sun came out, and I wanted to keep them all the same. So you know that is an amazing feature if you want to do that. Now I want to find, before I move on, I want to find that other shoot from Thailand that I did, because I wanted to show you the dynamic range Let me see if I can just bring it up. I've just got to see if I can find the find where it is. Because I just want to show you that 14 stops is, well, it actually wasn't even that, because I was shooting with electronic shutter, so it was probably less than that. Let me just go here. Rated. All right, so if we're looking at this as an example, this was shot with my A9. You can see here, it was 1/200th of a second, 6.3 ISO 100. Now I never took the flash for this at all, because I wanted to make sure that I travel very light when I went on the trip, and I wanted to not take flash and really sort of just enjoy the holiday. So I shot this girl while I was there. I wanted to use her on my video, and you'll see that if you go back and look at my video back there. To see this, you'll see if the Phuket video. But this was shot with electronic shutter, and I think electronic shutter only goes down to 12, nearly 13 bit. You lose a little bit of dynamic range. But so I exposed for the ambient here, and then pulling in the background, just using the sliders, I ended up getting this. So if we look at both between them, let me just come here. You can see here that the dynamic range of these cameras is now incredible. There's no flash used on this. This is just me editing the image, bringing back the shadows, doing things like that to fix that image. So again, this shows you what you can do now with the dynamic range of these cameras. Now this is using 12, nearly 13 bit, because I was shooting electronic shutter on this, which isn't the full 14 bit, because as soon as you go electronic, you lose a little bit of dynamic range. And imagine now what you could do with 15 stops. So what I'm saying is the dynamic range on any of these cameras is really amazing now. So don't get caught up too much on dynamic range about how much you can pull out of these cameras. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that anyway, just so you can see it. Now let's go back to this. So I'm going to go and sum up before I come to questions with you guys. So just to summarize, I actually believe, and this is what I would recommend to most of you out there, if you have an A6500, the beautiful upgrade now would be the a7III. Unless Sony release something like an a7,000 or whatever they're going to release, but I don't know when that will be. I believe the perfect upgrade for an a6500 or an a6300 now is the a7III. $2,000 is an amazing camera for what you're getting for that price range. It's not an entry-level camera. That easily, I think, compares with a 5D Mark IV, which is $4,000 or whatever they are. It's amazing. It blows anything that Canon and Nikon have in that price range out of the water. And Fuji and everyone. I mean, it's by far, I think, the best release that Sony have ever done, and it will be a game changer for the industry. I think this will be the best-selling camera by the end of the year in the marketplace full frame. Now, so I think most people that are shooting, that have a normal type photography business of shooting multiple things, shooting babies, shooting just normal portraits outside, doing weddings, doing events, all of that type of thing, you can't go past the a7III. And that's the camera I would be buying now if I didn't have the A9. So that's the camera that I would be purchasing above anything on those other cameras. Now, so that's the main camera I will produce. And if you look at Tony Northrup's video, I think it was Tony Northrup put one up the other day, he showed examples of landscape, and boy, there wasn't that much difference between the a7III and the a7R III. Oh, another thing I left out too of the a7R III, it has pixel shift, which the other cameras don't have. So if you did want to use pixel shift, that is the only camera that has that, the a7R III. So the average user out there will buy the a7III. If you are into landscapes, if you want to blow your images up very large or have the ability to crop, and I do crop 24 megapixel images a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but I can crop them. My idea when I shoot is to get it right in camera, so I don't crop that much, but you can crop quite a lot for a 24 megapixel camera. But if you really do like to crop an awful lot, you don't have the lenses and things like that, the a7R III can be an advantage because you need the megapixels. Definitely if you're shooting things like landscape, architecture, things like that, the a7R III is going to be the camera to choose. If you are into sports, if you don't want that, if you definitely don't want the blackout when you're shooting, you want the ultimate in focus, things like that, and you want to be able to shoot at 1/32,000th of a second, the A9 is the camera to actually get. So yeah, that's the one that I would be getting, and I still will not sell my A9 because I love those features that it actually gives me. I will be getting the a7III. I'm not sure when. I'm not sure whether I'll get it on release date or a little bit after. I'm not sure, but I will be getting that camera. Either one of those cameras, if you had an a7R III and an A9, the perfect backup is the a7III. It's the perfect backup camera to any of those systems. So I hope that answers your questions there. Now I want to go to questions because I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. So fire away some questions, guys. I'll answer a few of them. I don't want to make this go forever, but let's go. Casper said Sony A9 for the win, and we went through everything where some win, some are better than others at certain things. Snapclick said, have you heard about the Octopus Ink parable? No, I haven't actually. I'm not sure what that is. CW Daily said, A7 will sell gangbusters. It's the camera for the masses. Yes, and it is, and I just sort of went through why I believe that's true. Socrates says, if you have a bunch of APS lenses, go for the a7R III since the lenses will put you in 20 megapixels. And yeah, and that is one thing you've got to think about, yeah, because you will lose resolution if you are doing that. It may be the fact that you don't buy many APS-C lenses and then you're never going to have that problem, but it is a problem, yes, if you don't want to lower that resolution. Remember that you can use some lenses like the 10 to 18 on full frame. You can use it from 12 to 16 on full frame, so you are getting the 24 megapixels. So there are some lenses that let you do that. Gilbert's just saying hi. What else have we got? CW Day said, by the way, have you tried Capture One Pro with Sony files? It's so much better than Lightroom in my opinion. Yeah, and I have heard that. The thing with Lightroom is, though, I love the way it catalogs everything, and that's the thing for me, and I use these sort of devices which work with it, you know, and I've got profiles that I use and stuff and things like that, and it's just easier for me to stay with Lightroom. But yeah, I do understand it's better, and I've heard the colour is better through it as well, but I've got no problem with the colour science of Sony now anyway. Tony said he's going to start bagging me because I look like the negative of him because we have no hair. He is just angry, David. I think that's you talking about the angry photographer, are you? Sam said, I can't say I trust you, you know, wearing sunnies while shooting. I know, I can't believe that guy that said that, criticised me for wearing glasses, and I said, they're glasses, they just tint. That was such a funny comment, Sam. I love that comment that person did. Some of the things that trolls actually say to me just make me laugh. Do you know I had one the other day accusing me of being an alcoholic because I had a beer with you guys on there, and he said I shouldn't be doing that. What am I trying to do to the youth? I had one beer. Oh my God, these people, they just crack me up. I just deleted the comment, but honestly. What else? Angry photographer claims he isn't sponsored by anyone. Yeah, well, I'm not sure. How can he claim that he's never got money and he's always begging people for money? Like when the cyclone hit, that he had no money to fix his house up and all this sort of stuff, and he was asking for donations to fit it up, and then he goes out and buys the new Fuji. What was it? I can't remember the name of it. The medium format Fuji. He went out and bought that and about 4 or 5 lenses. I'm very sus indeed. Sony lack of lenses. I had a massive number of lenses with the old school lenses and still shoot old contacts and Canon. And this is the thing, I keep hearing people say the lenses. How many lenses do people need? Unless you're a sports shooter or you're a wildlife shooter that is tracking birds from a kilometre away, you've got ample lenses now with Sony, and Sigma have just come on board. There's all other Tamron. There's all other lens you can get with your adapters. It's just, honestly, they have to pick something. They have to pick something to whinge about the Sony because they're terrified of it. Richard said, I saw his video, SMH, I realised the people who are negative to a Sony are not good photographers. The thing is, unless you can back it up with your work, you should not be bagging other photographers. I mean, you shouldn't be doing that. And it just bugs me that they just go out and start. Amar's one of the worst, where he'll start bagging other photographers, like when he bagged Jason. Does everyone like Jason? No. But I actually like Jason, but the thing is, I would not ever bag another photographer's work in that respect and say your work's terrible and all that sort of stuff. The angry photographer does it all the time. He keeps shooting, and every time I've looked at his work, I just think, well, yes, you're a photographer, but, you know, I'm not going to say anymore. But you just think, honestly, these people that do this need to back up their work, and they don't. And it's often the ones, for instance, that will always troll me and come on saying, I need to learn Photoshop. I had one the other day that came on. And I just laughed and said, show me your work. Did he give me a link to his work? No, he didn't. And they never do. Because a good photographer is not going to bag someone else's work in that respect. They just won't do that, because why would you do that? You just wouldn't do it. X-Trans Sensor has its own set of issues, and the Fuji system, look, Kevin, is a great system. It's a great camera, and I was really ready to say, wow, that Fuji system, the new X-H1 is really unbelievable. But then Sony blew it out of the water when they brought the a7III out. They really did, and they took all of that fire out of that camera. They really did. The angry photographer tried to he was always bagging IBIS. I know he always bagged IBIS all the time. He put a video up the other day showing how good the IBIS was in the XH1, and it looked like shaky video. It was terrible. Have a look at it. Gilbert said, bottom line, Sony have now produced a camera that not only competes with the rest, but is better, and it is. I agree with you totally, Gilbert. Let him have it, David. I'm lucky because I can say things by not being sponsored by anyone, so no one can say to me, you know, you shouldn't be saying that, David, or whatever. So it's a good place to be, really, and that's one thing I love about having these talks with you guys. I mean, if Sony do the wrong thing, guys, I'll bag Sony, trust me, and I have bagged them about their mount on the top of the camera. The actual flash mount is flimsy on them. I've bagged them before about their weather sealing, so, you know, I've bagged Sony when it needs to be said. What's it said there? I wonder if these people are critical about the cars they drive. I know, and that's the thing. It's just ridiculous, you know. It really is ridiculous. Just get out there and shoot, guys. And stop just trying to get hits by bagging other cameras and saying untruths like, talk about the menu system. Who cares about Sony menu system? I use it once in a blue moon. Oh, it just makes me laugh. Get over the menu system. Sniper V said, angry photographer and Amar are crazy. The angry photographer should just concentrate on what he does best, which is the hardware reviews and reviewing lenses and doing, which he's amazing at. But then when he starts to just bag Sony for no reason, and it's unfounded bagging, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I like him. I actually like the angry photographer. What else have we got? CW Daily said, where was it? I shoot all the brands. Mostly my other kit is film, but I still shoot them all, and I'm not biased at all. That's good. Michael said, I'm here. It happened one time with the A9 in a very old Jimmy, and I spoke about that, Michael, where you had banning with the A9. I've been tons of places filming and shooting stills with my A9 lens and never had another issue, and I've never seen banning with mine at all, and I shoot electronic shutter all the time. What about have we got? The menu system is horrible on most camera systems. And it is, but I just don't think about it because once you're used to it, it's what you're used to. And like I said, I struggled when I went to the 5D Mark IV. I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never used it before. And I think that's where a lot of these people are whinging because they're using Canon cameras or Fuji. They get Sony and then they don't know how to use it. Get to learn the system. Once you learn it, it's fine. It's like learning to read. Once it sits in your memory, you don't have a problem finding anything. What else we got? Gilbert said it took me about half an hour to set up my new a7R III and not really looked at it since. And you don't. Once your menus are set, you very rarely go into them, especially now that you have the favourite menu on the cameras. George said they laughed at me when I bought my A200. They are not laughing anymore. David Johnson said, good to see you. Oh, that's talking about that. Marco Sports said, use any camera long enough in the menu system totally makes sense. And that's so true, Marco. Once you get used to it, it does. And that's the thing, you know, it's what you're used to at the time. And like I said, the only menu now I ever go into is the FN menu. Everything else, you can set up the FM menu amazing. And remember, and this is where most of these, I'm not going to say morons, but most of these other people, these dials that are at the top. Now, I'll show you this angry photographer, right? These dials at the top, this 1, 2, and 3 settings here. Now, you can set your camera up on there to have totally different systems at all. Now, I've got one of these to shoot 4K with certain settings. I've got another one to shoot 1080p as normal, and I've got another setting there which shoots 1080p slow-mo. So I've got multiple settings set on this cameras, and there's 2 more that you can bring up to through the FM menu as well, where you can set up other things as well. So all I do, check this out, Angry Photographer, all I do is, once I've set that up, I change that dial, everything is set. I don't need to go into the menus. I'm not clicking this menu button, going in here 30 times during each shoot and playing with the menus. I'm lucky if I go in there once every few weeks. So, Sony menu, get over it. Carl said it's very complex camera with multiple functions. This requires a lengthy menu, and it does, but once you set it up, like I said, you very rarely ever touch them. I came from Nikon to Sony and was not happy with the Nikon menu. If you don't use the menu dials, Bailey, they're all bad, and that's the problem they are. Sniper V said, complaining about the Sony menu system is dumb now, especially with the My menu. Any electronic device with lots of options will be complex. What else have we got? Mike said, I bought the a7R III when it came out. I have the Canon Mark 1V and Canon glass. It's really good, Mike. Like I said, I use the Canon Mark V2. Love the focus and video on that camera. It just wasn't for me. I just didn't like using that camera, but I'm so used to Sony now. That could have had an issue. I Am Brown said, no, that's just another thing. Troy said, how would shooting soccer with an A9 with a Canon 7200 and MCB, if I haven't tried the adapters, Troy, so I can't comment on using them with the adapters. And from what I've seen with Jason's video, the MC works fantastic in good lighting conditions, but I've heard mixed results if it starts to get under challenging lighting. Plus, I've heard the MC11 adapter doesn't work very well with video. So if you're doing video autofocus, the MC11 doesn't work that well. So you'd have to make a decision on that. I'm using only native lenses apart from the Batis. So I can't comment on how it would be. Certainly under good lighting, though, it would be fantastic. I'm just not sure how it would be under challenging lighting. Definitely if you're doing video, the MC11 struggles a little bit if you're doing video focus, automatic focus. Peter saying hi. Oh, God, I should have brought these up. Peter saying hi. What else have we got? Mike said, rented the A9. It was great for tracking. It is. It's amazing. I love that camera so much. Viewfinder worse than the a7 III. Yes, and I've mentioned that, Mike. It is definitely going to be worse. But if it's as they say it is, the same as my a7 III, I'm happy with that. Yes, I can see a little bit of a difference when you swap between both of them, but I've never said my a7 III had a bad viewfinder or EVF, so I'm quite comfortable with the way that they had to give you a difference with that camera for that price. There's no way they can give you everything the same as what you're getting with the a7R III or the A9. Otherwise, it would have cost you $3,200. So I'm quite happy with that viewfinder being as it is. Yes, and the shutter cycle is rated at less. Yeah, I'm not sure what it's rated at, but you've never ever run out of the shutter cycles. Now remember, that's another thing too, that if you're dealing with electronic shutter, the A9 is always going to be better because the sensor is better. So therefore, you're never going to get rolling shutter. So that's another issue. If you're going to shoot moving objects, the A9 is going to be far better with the electronic shutter. If you're dealing with the a7 III, as long as they're not moving, you're probably going to be okay. What else have we got here? SnapClick said, oh, thank you so much, Michael. Just saw that. Thank you so much for the donation. Oh, I love it. Your shirt is gold, not yellow. It's yellow. It's not gold. Now, let's have a look. SnapClick said, I already had the a7R III, but was also using my Nikon D4 for interior work. I recently decided to sell the rest of my Nikon gear and pick up an A9 and the 12-24. What a great lens that is for interior work. SnapClick said, the local camera store I deal with actually gave me the option of returning the A9 and getting a full credit on the a7 III and some more glass lighting. I decided to keep the A9, and I don't blame you because, like I said, there's no way I'm getting rid of my A9. I just adore that camera for those features that it has. A9 silent shooting, less chance of banding and rolling shutter. Yeah, and I just mentioned that, Mike, and that's a really good point, and it is a really big one. The 1/32,000th of a second and less rolling shutter can change the way that you shoot. SnapClick said also, love the no blackout shutter and use silent shutter on all the time. It's such an amazing camera. I never go on mechanical unless I'm using flash. Once a global shutter is released, then obviously we're shooting electronic shutter all the time. But until that point, how are we going for time anyway? Until that point comes out, yeah, I'm the same. I just shoot electronic all the time. Thank you so much, Michael, for the comment. Mike said the A9 1/32,000th of a second. Yes. Gilbert TV said A7R has better resolution on the back of the screen than EVS. Yes, it has, Gilbert. Same as the A9. It's got the same screen as both of those. Mike said they should have put a faster mechanical shutter on the A9. I'm not sure why they didn't. Yeah, there's got to be a reason. But yeah, I don't know why that's the case. But like I said, the number of times that I shoot faster than 5 frames, very, very rarely. David, 425 contrast on the versus 25 on the A9. That's a huge difference, and it is. And that's why I think the IAF may be better with the a7 III, Casper. Mike said the A9 wins for rolling shutter and banding. Yes, it probably will, definitely for rolling shutter. Peter said, glad you made it for a live stream. Good to see you on here, Peter. David Johnson said, yes, indeed. Oh, that's another thing. Stripe issue, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think that's blown all out of proportion. When the A9 came out, that's what everyone was talking about as well, and I've never seen it. SnapClick said, the only thing I don't like about the A9 so far is that I can't get the 1/32,000 shutter in A mode, only 1/16th. Oh, okay. It only works in S&M. Why is this? I'm not sure. I never use A mode anyway. I'm always shooting manual, but that's me, so I've never come across that. Yeah, but that's an interesting one. Michael said, if you try and keep using 10 frames per second flash at a wedding, they will bounce your butt. I know, they wouldn't. It would drive everyone nuts. You just wouldn't do it. I very rarely use flash now. I'm nearly always shooting constant light. Mike said, the big question, is the A9 worth twice the price of the a7 III? For what it is, I think it is. Yeah, I have no problem with what I paid for the A9, Mike. There's big differences when you use it. Casper said, what is your A9 versus A7 opinion? Well, we're sort of... Oh, no, that's Michael. Yeah, he's dealt with that. David said, depends on what your needs. Remember, the a7 III has a crop in 4K 30 and the A9 doesn't. That's a very good point too. Michael said, I only use the a7 III for 2 days, like for 2 hours a day, but bang for buck, grab an a7 III. Exactly, I agree with that. Mike said, wondering if there's going to be an A9R. There probably will be eventually, but not for a while, I wouldn't think. Dual focus pixel. Yes, thank you, Sam. Does anyone have an FS5? No, I don't have one. few people saying it's dual pixel focus. I always forget that. It'll be interesting to find out if the extra stop of dynamic range was added to the highlights or shadows of both evenly. Yeah, it will be actually. What else have we got? Just trying to see. Sniper V said, as a happy owner of the a7R III, I never expected the a7 III. It came out at the stacked spec-wise. I stung a little bit. Sony can fix this for me by adding small and medium RAW. Yeah, I wish they'd put that in, actually. That would be fantastic on the a7R III, just to save those file sizes. Casper said, I'm looking at joining the Angry Photographer camp. What else? We'll be chanting that again next month if the a7S III drops. Rumours it's probably not going to drop till later this year, though. I'm not sure if it will drop now at NAB because the a7 III is just released. I don't think it's going to drop at that point because it's too close to the a7 III. I think it may be later on in the year, September or something. Photokino may be the one. Pixel Shift only works in silent mode. Anyone going to buy the a7R III? The Northrops who believe in ND GM filters are useless in landscape. The 400 more contrast points is what kills me versus the 25 points. I know that is an amazing difference. Peter said, can't decide if I should get two a7 IIs or one a7 III and XA. I wouldn't do that, Peter. I wouldn't be buying mixed systems. It's too confusing, too hard to change. Definitely get two a7 IIIs. Frothmaker sold off my Canon gear. I bought the Sony a6 5000. Then Sony announced the a7 III, and the Sony went back to Best Buy. I don't blame you. I think that's a great move. Get the a7 III. JP, what card do I need in slot 1 for immediate playback after taking a shot? I use the Sony cards. I'm using these ones. They're the fastest ones that Sony release, so they're the ones that I've got. Jolly said, I wait for the Sigma 35 1.4 for Sony full frame or get the MC11 adapter version. Well, I love the Sony full frame version, but that's what I recommend. If not, the Sigma 35 1.4 will be beautiful. I used to have that lens when I had Sony, when I had Nikon years ago, and it was stunning. The art lenses are amazing. Plus, you get the MC11 adapter for free on that too, so that's probably the way to go. I'd wait if that's the case. JW said, I use Lightroom as well, mostly on my iOS devices, but definitely switched over to Capture One Pro for what I've seen so far. Shane said, beer, yeah. I've got to edit some wedding videos, wedding shots after this, so I better stay sober. What else have we got? I think a7R III 43 megapixel runs smoother in the CPU1. That's another thing too. The 24 megapixels is far easier on your computer than pushing around 42 megapixel files. Snapclip said, the Octopus Inc. Parable I was referring to earlier, this was a YouTube hate vid about the a7R III. Oh, okay. I can link it if you want to, but it was, bad. Oh, probably don't want to watch it because they get me angry. What else have we got? CW Daily said, IBIS is not really as good as in lens, but it's best to have IBIS, especially for the wide-angle lenses, which you mostly often do not have in the lens. I love IBIS, especially shooting video. It's more for video than stills, unless you're shooting long exposures. It certainly helps the video more than it does for stills. Michael said, I've been thinking about starting a YouTube channel, but it's a lot of work to do it right. It's much easier watching David's YouTube vids. CWA said, if I can remember that. Mikkel is here. Hi, Mikkel. Sam's got to go to work, so see you, Sam. BMCP, as long as Sony innovates at this level, it will be a target for the whiners. Keep up the good work, Sony. Yeah, true. The Batis 135 is on a pretty steep discount. It's 500 off, I think. I wouldn't be buying that lens, though. Not at 2.8. I'd be getting the the Sigma lens if I was going to get anything in that range. I'd be waiting for that to be released, a 1.8 version. Yeah, $1,499, 500 off. It is a big saving. I'm going to read a couple more questions, and then I'm going to be off, guys, because it's I better start some wedding editing. What else have we got? JP said, a7R for landscape, cityscapes, and architecture. It supports pixel shift and 43 megapixels. Yep, I agree. Everything else, the a7III, unless you're into like sports and stuff like that I spoke about before. West Sarah said, I'm really torn, prepared to get the a7R III. I shoot hunting, lifestyle, which includes ducks, upland birds. Everything is saying AF on the a7III, but the high resolution has me stuck. If you shoot more lifestyle, Sarah, get the a7III. If you're shooting more like birds that are a long way off and stuff like that, get the a7R III. But to be honest, this is where it's hard, because if you're shooting lots and lots of birds, the A9 is better because you need that fast tracking. So it's a hard one. To be honest, I think looking at what you shoot, if you've got lifestyle in there as well, I'd be getting the a7III. Which constant lights do I use? Well, I use multiple ones, CW Daily. I use the ice lights. If you go to my link down below, it'll give you all the stuff that I use on Amazon. And I've got ice lights on there, and there's also near roto lights. I also have some smaller lights. I even have some other lights. If you go back onto my channel, I went through all the constant lights that I use. I have stacks of different ones that I use in studio and stuff like that as well. So I have a big range of lighting that I go through. It's crazy the amount that I have, actually. But check my link down below and have a look through there. Or go back to the bit when I'm setting up my photography business, because I go through all the lighting that I use. A new 35 probably coming out. There will be a GM version of that lens, I'm sure, eventually. Whether you can justify it, though, against the Sigma, going to be interesting to see. Don't say rolling shutter quickly. I'll go with the a7R III. Lets you crop more when you're doing birds and wildlife. Yeah, if you're cropping in, it definitely would be an advantage. I love the A9 and use it more than any other camera because it's so efficient. I agree, Michael, totally. Sarah said, that's what I've been able to crop when I need the extra reach. Well, if that's the case, you would go the a7R III. But the A9 is an amazing bird one because it'll track birds far better than what you'll get on the a7R III. And that's about it. All right, guys, well, I've gone through everything. Please, if you haven't, give me a like. Please give me a big like. And if you can, subscribe to the channel, obviously, if you haven't subscribed. Don't forget to join us in our Facebook page, because that's the best place where you can have chats with me and most of the people that are following us in this live chat. Any questions, leave that down below, because I always get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I'll see you all again soon for the next video. So that's all, guys. Hope that's answered a lot of your questions about which camera you should get. Probably has been a long video again. But I'll catch you all again soon for the next video. Bye for now.